So this is Laura, aka the Sound Sommelier, here with green tea. What's your earliest memory of hip hop?
Wow, straight in there.
I don't like to mess around unless you want to do a little bit more of an introduction.
No, that's cool. That's cool. Wow, earliest memory of hip hop. Yeah, it's a tough one because I grew up in the '90s, so it was kind of always part of the landscape.
Mm.
Hard to pinpoint a specific moment. I think early memories is probably my older brother had the first De La album on cassette tape, 3 Feet High and Rising. And then I think a couple other tapes like probably NWA and maybe like Public Enemy, Beastie Boys, stuff like that. But then what really kind of like made me fall in love with it was later when I was maybe like 12, 13 years old and watching skate videos.
Okay.
And I remember there was skateboard videos. There was a skate video series called 411, and they had stuff like Far Side, Souls of Mischief, Gangstar, stuff like that. That was like my first touch point with that kind of stuff, where it like really strongly resonated with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then through that kind of stuff, then, from there it was like the rabbit hole, then discovered Tribe, and that was kind of like the deal clincher. Like that was the first stuff that like resonated with kind of how I felt and like hanging out with, the people I was hanging out with at the time, and kind of like being a teenager and growing up and
Mm-hmm.
trying to find your place in the world, I guess.
Right.
But it was really that like the like Souls of Mischief, Far Side, Tribe stuff that really felt like, okay, this is what it feels like,
I can agree with you there. I think we're around the same age because I grew up in the 90s also, and
Yeah.
was and still is my number one. So not necessarily hip hop, but are there any records you recall playing in your home when you were younger that you kind of connected with? Or
Yeah, my mom played a lot of jazz and soul and stuff.
mm-hmm.
Like all the big ones like Aretha Franklin, and she was into Prince, and then some like, piano, jazz, instrumental jazz, stuff like that I guess kind of like filters into your background tapestry,
Mm-hmm.
in your subconscious. And then, yeah, like when the stuff, the hip hop stuff that really connected with me then when I was like, teenager, like 13, 14, 15, kind of like getting into music more seriously, I guess was oftentimes like the jazzy stuff, like the jazz influence, Diggable
Makes sense.
Planets type shit,
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that kind of like filters into it, from childhood,
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
subconscious nostalgia,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not the stuff that your parents pushed on you.
No, exactly, yeah.
So where in Canada do you spend most of your childhood?
So my mom's from Montreal, but then my grandparents lived in Calgary, Alberta.
Okay.
My dad is from Germany, and so as a kid, I was kind of between those places. But then for high school, I was in Germany, so I was at we were at an American international school.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of like a residual spillover from, Cold War, like post-war, and then going into Cold War, and there was still a lot of like U.S. military bases around Europe.
Right.
And so then you had like schools popping up out of that, and but yeah, high school I was in Germany.
Nice. Do you think your environment had any influence on your decision to pursue a career in music?
I mean, for sure. like I said, then, you know, from teenagers, like all the guys that I make music with to this day are mostly homies from school.
Wow.
And so, you know, like back then, um, in our circle of friends, like I guess, you know, for most people back then, it was a time when it was also hip hop was like staunchly divided kind of into these like segregated camps back then, you know, it was like the nerdy, backpacky, you know, boom bappy side of the fence, and then there was like the jiggy, clubby side of the fence.
And the gangster rap.
Yeah, yeah, and that dividing line was like pretty stark. And back then, it's still like it meant something to, you know, like you had to work to kind of like be part of that
Right.
culture. You know, even where we were at in Germany, it was like, you know, we all like wrote graffiti, went to the record store every weekend. Like there was, it was like very early days of internet. There was no, you know, like sourcing music kind of thing other than physically going to the record store and like digging for shit, you know. And
Is
that,
this like Napster time? Like Napster.
yeah, pre-Napster even,
Oh, okay.
just yeah, but right around the cusp. And I remember in like maybe maybe senior year of high school, there was like some people started like, you know, downloading shit, and that was
Right.
revolutionary. But before that, it was like you go to the record store, you know. And we happened to have a super dope record store in Frankfurt, Germany, in the town where the city where we grew up, which at the time, like, I didn't realize. I was just like, this is the local digging spot, you know. But now, then looking back on it, and then like, you know, going around, you know, we've all kind of been collecting records, buying vinyl for like, in the meantime, decades. But you only kind of realize how lucky you were back then with the experience of traveling around, going to different digging spots around the world, you know. But the record store in the city we grew up was this spot called Pro Vinyl, and that like had a huge influence. The dude who ran it just, you know, had great taste in music, and he was the type of dude who he wasn't like one of those like standoffish record store dudes who's like, you know, what do you know about like what's your business in here, fucking 15-year-old kid. He would really kind of like nurture you and try to like educate. And so through that, you know, he saw like, oh, you know, if you dig that, like you should check out da 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 da. And then, you know, at the time for us, it was like, I mean, we got like super deep into it, and it became like a strong identity thing, you know. So used to run around and like write graffiti and do like mixtapes on cassette. And we, yeah, like started selling cassette tapes in high school during lunch and shit. And then with that, we kind of, that was like the first starting point, I guess. When you talk about like made you decide to pursue a career, that was never really like a conscious decision, you know. We just like made music for fun with the homies, and then people ended up liking it. So one thing led to another, and that it just kind of happened, you know.
Fair.
Um,
How did you come to be known as Green Tea?
oh shit. Yeah. Actually, it's kind of a lame story, but initially my
You might
first
think.
my first DJ name was Nest Tea,
Okay.
because I used to drink a lot of like peach iced tea, and it was just, I was like, you know, 14 years old or 15 years old or whatever, and I thought it was cool to do like the iced tea thing, but with NES-T. And then as I got a little older, I realized like Nestle is not that cool of a corporation. You know what I mean? And and I guess I was kind of like on like an ecological tip at the time. Smoked a lot of weed, and then it kind of became Green Tea, and then all the homies started calling me Green, and yeah, that's just been my name, you know.
Well, it worked out. Who would you name as early influences on your style?
I mean, for sure, like all the stuff I just said, you know, Tribe for sure, Souls of Mischief, Far Side, stuff like that. But then also like we were super into stuff like People Under the Stairs, the kind of like rhyme sayer stuff, late 90s, early 2000s. And then like the Stones Throw shit, when we discovered that, that was like mind blowing. At the time, it was like the early, like when the first Quasimodo record came out. And then all the Dilla produced stuff, Slum Village and all the Tribe Dilla stuff. It was like the Soulquarians time, that Common like Water for Chocolate record.
Definitely.
And that was, you know, all the kind of like standard late 90s, early 2000s, like nerdy backpacker camp stuff that was like jazz, soul sample influence. And, yeah.
Soulquarians kind of encompasses all that.
Yeah.
How did you, FP, and Fade meet?
High school. We were buddies in school.
Or high school friends, okay.
Yeah. And so we were a big crew back then. We were actually, so ASM is because we were two graffiti crews. Fade and FP were a couple grades younger than me in high school. And so we were like kind of like the older brother crew. So like Fade's older brother was a grade above me, and we were homies. And initially our crew was SM, like that's what we used to write. And then they were like the little upstarts, and they wrote AS. And then we kind of like forged and then became merged and became ASM.
That's kind of like how you merged with Matic to be asthmatic. That's cool.
Yeah.
When did the three of you decide to form a State of Mind?
I mean,
just joked around about starting a group, or just kind of?
Yeah, it was like, I mean, we never really like had the conversation like, let's be a group, let's like, you know, make a band kind of thing. It was never like that. We were just all homies, and like everybody back then like did a bit of everything. Like everybody, you know, tagged, and everybody would try to rhyme and make beats and DJ and stuff, and skateboarding and shit like that. And it just kind of crystallized that like some people were naturally more adept at certain things, you know. And so Fade became the beat guy, and then like initially like everybody would rhyme on stuff, and then it kind of crystallized that like, okay, FP's like actually pretty fucking dope, and like, you know, and then yeah, I mean, we just made music for fun, like for us, for the homies, and it was never more than that. And then it was only when kind of like even within our high school that like other people would get hyped on the stuff we were kind of just doing and putting on cassette tape, and we were like, oh, maybe there's something to do here. And then we played like a show, our first show, which was like not in the cafeteria, but like
right.
like at an actual spot. And yeah, it was dope. It was like crazy energy, and that was kind of like a moment where we were like, maybe, you know, we should take this a little more seriously. And then, you know, at the time, then after high school, there was like MySpace came around, and so we had like, you know, the group page that we would just, that we would upload stuff on. And then we all kind of like went off to college and stuff, and then, you know, we just got lucky. We got some people discovered our MySpace page, I guess. We got hit up by Wax Taylor, French beat maker, and he was like, yo, do you want to jump on this track? And that was kind of like the launch pad for like an actual career thing, where then, you know, we were like working other jobs and shit and still going to college, and we then like had the opportunity to be like, okay, maybe, you know, we can actually make some money off of this. And yeah, now here we are, fucking 15 years later or whatever it is.
Was Say Yes that track, or was it another one that you guys did with it?
No, there was one before that. It was Positively Inclined. That was
Okay.
2007, 2006, 2007, around
Mm-hmm.
there. That was the
Okay.
first one. And we didn't really like expect much of it. It was just like, he sent a beat, it was dope. We rhymed on it. And then next thing you knew, it was like, it kind of like, semi blew up to be like a summer radio single in France. Um, and then he invited us to play a show out there. And I remember the first time we played a show with Wax Taylor in France. We were still super young at the time, and we got to Paris, and we heard like our joint being played on the radio, just like in shops and shit. We were like, "What the fuck's going on here? This is nuts." And then when we played the show, and like when we played the song, and we realized like everybody fucking knows this shit. Everybody knows all the words and stuff, to the extent that French people know the words. But that was kind of like a moment too, where we were like, okay, shit, like this is something that we gotta like seize the moment and try to ride this thing out.
For sure. I still remember when I interviewed Wax maybe 10 years ago, hearing that song "Say Yes" and just being like, "Ooh, the song is catchy." Like I'm still to this day listen to it all the time. What was it like working with him?
It was life-changing in a lot of ways. Touring with Wax Taylor, we met Matic, who, that's like family to this day, and we met a lot of the musicians that we ended up working with, for years and years. And that whole experience just opened a lot of doors in terms of career opportunity, financially, getting exposure, being able to like sustain yourself straight up from music, and understanding like the mechanics of the industry, because we didn't know about any of that shit. And like the music industry is not something where there's no like apprenticeships or precedent for like being an artist. You just get thrown in the cold water, and then you gotta swim and figure it out. There's no like guidebook, and that for us was kind of like the learning terrain, where we just got super lucky that we were straight away thrown into a situation where we were like touring, significant crowd venues, and the tracks we were doing were getting like, radio play and like TV love and all that stuff. So, yeah, it was like going to college,
True. So ASM's debut album Platypus Funk was released in March 2010 with features from Wax Taylor, Sadat X, Wild Child, Vadim, and others. What's the meaning behind the title, and how did it affect the story as a whole?
Yeah, so that was our first kind of like, I guess, real album. We had a release before that called Cosmic Flavor, which got released in Japan, weirdly. And the title, the platypus thing at the time, was because we kind of came from these like diverse, different backgrounds. We didn't have like a geographic locality to rep, like in hip hop, it's all about like, I'm repping this. Yeah. And we didn't have that. We were just like, we're us, like Fade the Beatmaker, he's from UK. FP originally German, but then we all went to this American international school and stuff. And so the platypus, we felt like represented us because it's a mongrel, it's like part marsupial, part mammal kind of thing. It has a bill like a duck and shit. And we thought it was a cool thing to kind of like, identify with.
Interesting. So Crown Yard came out the following year. How did that album represent your growth as artists while staying true to your unique style?
I guess stylistically, we went like more straight funk direction. But then 2010, 11, like it was at a point in hip hop where I mean, even though that was our, like, hip hop was always like our childhood sweetheart, I think
Hmm.
we kind of like fell out of love with a lot of the stuff that was coming out around that
Right.
time. Um, and we were buying a lot of like funk records, soul records, Brazilian stuff, West African stuff, this kind of thing. A lot of like horn section heavy stuff. And so we started working with a horn section in studio, and we were coming from a place where we were playing a lot of shows, and we definitely conceived that album to an extent with the thought in mind, like, how's this shit gonna translate live, you know?
Hmm.
Um, it was less like
Get
a,
travel in the horn section.
yeah. So we started traveling with the horn section. We started playing with the
Oh,
horn section
okay.
live. Yeah. We played with the horn section for, yeah, I mean, probably like 4 or 5 years, something like that. Um, but yeah, it kind of we kind of drifted away from the like this is music for your headphones in your
Hmm.
bedroom to like we know that there's going to be a release and a tour, and how's this shit going to work live, basically.
Smart. The group's third album, The Jade Amulet, which dropped in 2015, is truly a hip hop odyssey, complete with its own official trailer. I read that fans consider this album to be your magnum opus as well as your most slept on album. Would you agree with that sentiment?
I mean, it's definitely the record that we put the most work into. Um, we were at a place, I guess, where also because of touring with Wax Taylor, like a lot of the musicians that helped us compose and put together that record were from the Wax Taylor tour. So it was Benji Bouton, who was the guitarist. Mathieu Duton was the cello player that we worked with on that. And then we had our horn section, and a couple other people. But yeah, we went like super deep with that one where, I mean, I remember having quite a few conversations, also with Matic, but also with FP especially about did and a lot of rap shit, you know?
Hmm.
Um, Even just simply in virtue of the fact that in rap you say more words per minute than in any other style of music, you know?
Hmm.
So our whole thing was like, nobody's fucking saying anything, and they're saying so many fucking words, you know? And we had this idea initially where it was like, oh, it would be dope to do just one track where between FP and me with the two MCs, we had, we were thinking like it would be cool to have a dynamic where one of us is the first person protagonist
Hmm.
perspective, and
Hmm.
the other one is the third person omniscient narrator. Like if you were reading a book and it's like it's the
Right.
voice of the author, and then it switches into the characters, having a conversation or a monologue or internal monologue kind of thing. But like,
Hmm.
oh, it'd be dope to do like one track to mess around with that. And then we were like, fuck it, we could do a whole record like this, and everybody could appear, all the features could appear as characters, And then this idea just kind of fucking spiraled, and like, yeah, we went crazy deep with it. We tried to make like a hip hop rap musical version of like the hero's myth,
Uh-huh.
Homer's Odyssey, fucking Star Wars, all that
Right.
shit. Um, and it took a long time, took a lot of work. It basically meant like a total reversal of
Right.
the writing process, because typically it would be like, okay, Fade or whoever beat makers that we're working with would, give you a beat, and then you reflect and say like, okay, how does this hit me? What do I want to write about on this? And then you write on it. But in this case, it was like we wrote the story first, and then we composed the music to fulfill certain narrative and emotional functions within that
Hmm.
story,
Hmm.
within the narrative trajectory. And so then we had to compose the music like knowing specifically what end we wanted to achieve,
Hmm. And
and
what
then the
feeling you
lyrics.
wanted to do. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so in that regard, I mean, yeah, magnum opus. I don't know, but it was a lot of fucking work to put that shit together, you know. And I don't think we'll ever do that again to that extent, because that shit took us like 2 years, and
Hmm.
you know,
That'd be a lot to live up to if you did it again.
for sure, for sure. And also just the landscape has changed, man. The way that people consume music nowadays is just totally different. It's
Yeah,
all
they're not
about,
all about albums. Hmm.
yeah, it's all about release singles and,
Right.
stay relevant. You can't afford to take 2 years off to then come back with something else unless, you have the reputation to justify it.
Right.
Um, and most slept on, I don't know, because I feel like the people who get it, they really get it, you know.
Hmm.
I mean, there was some shit a couple years ago, got tagged in a photo on IG of some dude who had tattooed my entire verse from one of the Jade Amulet tracks on his arm, you know?
Oh, I think I saw that.
Yeah, dude.
I think you reposted it. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. And
that's
so
crazy.
that kind of shit happened with that record, where people were like, and plus then, it had the Doom feature thing that a lot of people got hyped on. Um, and yeah, you can always say whatever you do, oh, I wish more people were exposed to it, or, in terms of promotion or whatever. But the main intention, I guess, with everything we do is that, like, the people who are like-minded, who we do it for because we understand that kind of like sensitivity, that they get it and they appreciate it. And with the Jade Amulet, I feel like we definitely achieved that.
Right. So the video for Masking is equally unique in its vision. How did that collaboration with MF Doom come about?
Yeah, that was nuts. I mean, Doom is like definitely my top three, if not all-time favorite MC. That
That
was
must be great.
yeah, and so like we were like super intense Doom stans. Knew all his verses and shit, studied it, picked it apart. He's an incredible writer. Like he's one of the few guys who to whom what I talked about earlier doesn't apply. The whole thing about like wasted words. This dude, writes rhymes like a literary heavyweight, changing perspective and shit, and like um, metaphysical layers and shit, like crazy stuff. And so we wrote the character of like the antagonist, like the villainous, tyrant king character, with Doom specifically in mind. And we were just kind of like, we're just gonna fucking write this part for him and pitch it to him, and hope he gets it. And I guess, I mean, yeah, we just got lucky, man, because Doom, I guess, he's like notoriously hard to pin down, elusive,
I've heard that. Mm-hmm.
But in our case, it was literally just like found an email address online, sent the track, sent the pitch, and then got a phone call back like 2 days later, and it was like, yeah, down to do it. Yeah, but that was definitely like, childhood pipe dream bucket list type shit. And, that's gonna be like, one for the grandkids kind of thing.
Yeah, you got to make sure they appreciate you doing it.
Yeah. They will.
So the following year, ASM put out String Theory as a limited vinyl release, which served as a return to your unique boom bap style. How would you define String Theory as it applies to your intentions behind the album?
That was basically like we'd spent 2 years working on this fucking like, intensely sophisticated orchestral piece, and we just wanted to like make some fun music again. That was it. It was like the polar opposite. It was just like, yo, let's just, we were in a house in the south of France, and we put it together in like 2 weeks, 10 days. And yeah, it was just that. It was like, okay, no like additional. Actually, Benji Bouton, our guitar player, he was on that too, and we had some Fender Rhodes parts from our man Tom out of London. But it was totally different in terms of like the recording process. It was like super stripped back, really just like us three in a room, and just do whatever feels good,
So switching gears a little bit, who are the Makoto Bros? Makoto.
Makoto, yeah, crazy. So that's me and my homie Byron. He's my business partner on like a side venture, and
Mm-hmm.
we breed and distribute Japanese beef in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, like gastronomy, food and wine is kind of like my second big love, other than music. And
Mm-hmm.
this was a thing that kind of like started out, I guess, as a side hustle thing. With
Kind of like how hip hop did.
What's that? Sorry.
Kind of like how hip hop did.
Yeah, exactly. But a little more strategic maybe because in this case it was like, music is fickle. It's not something you can really like bank on for your retirement.
Right.
And so I was just like, yeah, it's good to have something else going on inside.
Mm-hmm.
And that became our thing. So, we deal with a lot of Japanese restaurants in Europe and kind of like fine dining, high-end gastronomy stuff. And yeah, it's fun.
Nice. So ASM celebrated signing with Chinese Man Records with the release of Grape in 2019, which was the first single off the album Color Wheel. How did this new partnership inspire your creative process when making the record?
It's hard to say, we started touring with Chinese Man, the band Chinese Man, the group, because of just connections on the kind of like French tour circuit, mutual friends and stuff like that. And then became super close friends, and it was just like a natural progression. One thing led to the next. We were touring with them, we were hanging out with all the guys from the label all the time, and then when it came to making the record, I guess, yeah, you could say that there's some influence from the time we spent with Chinese Man on the road.
Mm-hmm.
At which point we kind of started to, we were on the festival circuit and stuff like that, and I guess we started to find some resonance again with some contemporary music that was coming out, which we hadn't really had for a while. Like for a while we were like super nerdily stuck in our corner of being like, fuck all that. We're gonna make like orchestral soul, like David Axelrod type shit. And then at the time, I guess, it was some cool stuff coming out, like the Earl Sweatshirt stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
hip hop was kind of becoming interesting again.
Mm-hmm.
And we were on tour with them, and I guess we were kind of like, partying in the tour bus after shows and playing new shit for the first time in a while. And I guess that kind of filtered in then into the process of making that record.
Nice. Any chance there's still a limited edition hand painted vinyl laying around somewhere?
Let me take a look.
Wow.
Boom.
That's amazing.
If you want it, I can send it to you.
Really?
Yeah. I got a few. I got a few in my
That'd be dope. I'm happy to pay for shipping or whatever.
Yeah, we'll talk about that after.
All right, nice. So speaking of Brooklyn, how did you come to work with Brooklyn's own Daylight Robbery?
We went to high school together.
I should have known.
Okay.
Okay. And you just stayed in touch.
Yeah, it's Rob, man. He's a piece of shit. Nah, he's like, one of my best friends from since we were 13, 14 years old. So he was always part of the crew around ASM and stuff. He moved to Brooklyn, years and years ago. And yeah, he just kept kind of like making beats on the sly, and then his shit now is really dope, man. He's got a record coming out called Moons of Jupiter, and we're featured on, I don't know, like 6 or 7 of the tracks, something like that. And he's also now part of Clouds in the Headlock
Oh, okay.
for the new stuff going forward. Yeah.
So like is he on both volumes of the?
No, the stuff we released,
Oh,
he didn't touch that. But the
it's
new
coming
stuff we're
up.
working on, he's part
Okay,
of it.
nice. So going back to the culinary side of things, not only did the pandemic put a hold on your ability to tour, but also made it difficult to indulge in your love of gastronomy.
Yeah,
With so many countries in Europe experiencing a second wave, how will you keep your culinary skills sharp?
cook at home.
Yeah, I seen your post. I'm like, that can't be a home cooked meal.
Yeah. That's me.
That's amazing.
I mean, some of it I post shit from restaurants that I love too. Yeah, for sure. But no, I cook a lot. I mean, I love that shit. It's I never had like a formal training, never went to culinary school or anything like that, but just like with music, never went to like music conservatory either. It's just if
Right.
you love something, I guess, and
You
you
make it
commit
happen.
yourself to it, and
Mhm.
you kind of if you have good taste, I feel like that's the most important like premise to be able to get, I don't know, good at something or be able to actualize what it is you want to have as a result, whether it's like, on a record or on a plate or whatever it might be.
I think that's a really good observation. So ASM's latest release, Blue Cocoon, was written, composed, and recorded all after the pandemic hit, and many were forced into quarantine. How were you able to stay creative during that time, especially when the end result is looked at as one of your most sophisticated and mature productions to date?
I mean, I guess a lot of people have been pretty creative because like ain't shit else to do, you know. Plus the uniqueness of the circumstance of like what we've been going through collectively as a species this year
Mm-hmm.
is a lot of intense information, and has provoked, I guess, a lot of people to reassess their priorities in life and just kind of think about where they're at and what's important. Um, which is a good mind space to be in to work and write and you know and create stuff. So we made that whole record never being physically in the same room together because the other two dudes are in the south of France, and yeah, it was like during lockdown and stuff. So we were literally just sending shit back and forth. But I mean, we've been making music together with Fade and FP for so long, like since we're in high school, that it's a super natural process. And in terms of the artistic direction, again, I feel like at the moment, especially the last 2 years or so in hip hop, there's a lot of really dope shit coming out that we've kind of gravitated towards, like all the Alchemist produced shit, minimal soul loop stuff,
Oh,
the J Electronica record, the Madlib Freddie Gibbs stuff, Rock Marciano and stuff like that, where it's like, stripped back raw soul loops, and the dynamic of those types of tracks emphasize the writing in a different way because it's almost like the MC is no longer like a rhythmic element.
right.
It's more of like a lead trumpet thing,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like it's just you have this minimal tapestry and then there's a lot more emphasis on what you have to say. And I feel like, yeah, maybe we were in a place where we felt like we were ready for that, and we had some shit to say, or we were having fun writing. It was also coming off the back of the first two Clouds in a Headlock mixtapes, working on those with Matic, and that definitely like changed our approach also to writing um, at the time. And so yeah, it just felt good, and it came together super naturally, and yeah, I feel pretty good about it.
Nice. I never thought of it that way with the MC and the production. So you're known as Green Tea to ASM fans. You assumed the identity of GT Lovecraft after joining Clouds in the Headlock. who released their debut mixtape, Asthmatic Volume 1, earlier this year. The follow-up, Asthmatic Volume 2, only just came out last week. How would you describe the group's experimental approach to sound?
I mean, Clouds in a Headlock has everything to do with Matic, basically. He hit us up after we hadn't like worked on much music for a while, early last year, I guess. And he was just like, yo, like, you know, let's work on some shit together. I mean, we've been tight just on like a human level for years.
Right.
And I always respected and exalted him as a craftsman. Like, he's crazy nice, just on a penmanship level.
Mm-hmm.
And he has an insane work ethic, man, where it's like, he's like a Mad Lib type dude, but with rhymes, where he literally just like churns out output with no strategic thought of like, when is this going to be released, or what's my like, tactical interest here. It's just like a compulsion. It just floods out of him, And so seeing that work ethic was super inspiring to kind of like be like, okay, I want to try to tap into that. And so then working on the Clouds tapes, he was kind of like the dude who piloted that in terms of the composition style, the kind of like, chopped up, seemingly erratic, like sound texture sprinkles and everything. And in terms of the writing, it was just like, just going for imagery and trying to express yourself like as a writer without any thoughts of like, what are we doing this for? What are we trying to achieve? Just like raw fun. And if working on the asthmatic shit felt like being in high school again,
Nice.
And like not having any thought of like, what's the point of this, and how are we going to place this in this track, and how's this going to work live? It was literally just like, create what you want to hear with your homies, and that's it. And yeah, it just came together like that. It feels really good, man.
Yeah, in conversations I've had with him, it definitely sounds that way. Like he doesn't write for the purpose of putting together an album or anything. It's just
no. It's
like
insane.
a release or an outlet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say each member brings their own unique style to the table, or have you found a sort of common ground from which to build on?
No, I definitely think I think there's a lot of commonality in terms of we mutually respect each other's craft, and we have a lot of like shared references. You still hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, so there's a lot of commonality there, but I think stylistically, yeah, we have our respective distinctiveness, in terms of like voice timbre and writing style. Like FP has a lot of like just hilarious punchlines and stuff, like genius stuff, where he's like the old dude who's like chuckling to himself on a bench kind of style,
Nice.
And D Matic he's just like super vivid with the imagery, and I don't know, he just has like a mastery of the craft, which is so like natural. And I guess my shit is maybe a little more like academic, literary kind of style.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of common ground, and it's crazy fun working with each other.
That's all that matters, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any other projects you're working on or have coming up that you want to share?
Music-wise, no, and nothing specific. I mean, we're working on more cloud shit. That's kind of the main focus right now. There'll be more ASM shit next year with Chinese Man Records for sure. And then yeah, I mean, I'm doing a lot of food stuff, wine stuff, and just trying to, make sense of the madness.
Yeah. That's like number one.
Yeah.
Appreciate you taking the time.
No
I
doubt.
hope you have a nice week, and I'll hit you up about that record because
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. Please do. Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, peace.